going to talk about waste management. And if you remember 2 years back, BMC came up with this thing that you have to segregate your dry waste and wet waste. I want people to raise their hands who made the mistake of putting the garbage in the wrong bin for the first 1 month. Let's do this, because I did. Anybody else? You guys are so good. You did not make any mistake. Okay. But I think I did. Some of us did here. But to start with, municipal solid waste, MSW as we call it, and data says that by around 2021, there's going to be some 110 million metric ton of MSW waste in India alone. Let's start with the topic on that. If Samir, could you take us through the whole crisis in the MSW section to start with?
Sure. Thanks, Pooja. So, with respect to MSW, there is a complex problem because of obviously segregation and collection, as you have pointed out. The other aspect is that the calorific value of waste, municipal waste in India, is relatively low. So to make a commercial solution out of it becomes somewhat challenging and requires the government to participate in that. Where I have spent a lot of time on is the other aspect of waste, which is agricultural waste. And there, together with the United Nations Environment Program, we have been working for the last 2 years in trying to see how we can take a look at the 60 million plus tons of agri-waste in the country. So if I may sort of talk a little bit about the agri-waste first and then come back to your question. So we, over the last 2 years, have spent an enormous amount of time with the various stakeholders involved in this space. This includes farmers, farmer organizations, the large oil companies, the government, and various potential investors in this space. And every year in Delhi, for 2 weeks, we have headline news on PM 2.5 going through the roof, and then we look at the headlines and then we move on. So that perhaps is not the way to solve a problem. So we have been focusing on this, and while there have been some ways that people have addressed this, to my mind, the way to address it and what UNEP has been working on is to see how we can solve multiple problems with a solution. And what we have been talking about is seeing how we can create paddy straw into bio-CNG. And that has been the thrust of our efforts, while we have also looked at a lot of the MSW waste situation in India as well. And if you look at the problems it solves, I mean, number one, we import 81% of our mobility-related energy needs. So if a portion of that could be substituted with bio-CNG, you're having an immediate impact on fiscal policy, on the import bill. Secondly, if you look at the health impact in Delhi, there are 3 levels of the impact. One is obviously CO2 emissions, which we read about. Second is when you're breathing the air in Delhi, it actually has a permanent impact on your lung in terms of the absorption capacity of your lungs. Thirdly, it's a productivity impact, and obviously lastly, it is an impact on mortality. Then I think the bio-CNG that we produce, effectively, we are talking about a solution which is local production, local consumption. So we have come up with a solution which we have also discussed with a number of development banks. And we have had long discussions with BNP as well. And we believe that the work has been done. And 2020, in my mind, is a year when we will get some solutions on the road. The government has also been very supportive. I mean, I don't know many of you who have known about the Sattva initiative. Sattva stands for Sustainable Alternative Towards Affordable Transportation. And that is an initiative which effectively talks about how we can produce sustainable energy or meet a portion of energy needs from the waste in the country. So I actually see waste as a huge opportunity. And this is one where we believe we will see implementation this year.
Good, but I'm going to come to Bhuvan next. You wanted to bust some myths around the calorific value on solid waste management. Let's get started on that.
No, actually, on this one, I would agree with you that, frankly, if you look at our waste, it's mostly organic waste. So we produce about 350 grams of waste per person in India, versus the US will be about 3 kilograms per day. So if you look at the 350, it's mostly banana peels, chilies, etc. So you can't actually produce all that much energy from it just because the calorific value is not that high. But on the topic of myths, maybe I'll start with some issues and ideologies. I think the first issue with ideology is that people can't make money from waste, right? So we talked about that with water. I think the same issue is there for waste. Now, why am I up here on this panel? I'm an investor, I'm a private equity guy. Why am I here? The reason is that last year, we actually invested $550 million in India's largest waste management company. And this is a company called Ramki Enviro. But I think you'll be surprised to see, why is KKR investing in India's waste? Why isn't Tata investing? Why isn't Aditya Birla investing? Why isn't Suez and Veolia, which are the world's largest waste management companies, why aren't they here? Which is a little bit of a surprise. And I think that the issue is that it's actually pretty difficult to make money from waste today. And there are various reasons for that. But we need to fix that problem. I think the second issue is people think that there is a lot of value in their waste. And again, I'll respectfully disagree with other panelists in that today we should be paying somebody to take care of our waste. There is not enough value in our waste because, like I described, most of it is organic. So you should be paying somebody to be taking care of your waste, not getting paid for it. I mean, we keep hearing people say that, look, I should be getting paid for my waste, biomining, et cetera. If you study it, it doesn't really make much sense. So a couple of, I think, ideological issues are there which are really sort of hampering people sort of going forward. I think the third one is, we keep saying that, look, let's reuse, recycle. I think all of that is great, but let's stop waiting for people to change their behaviors before we start treating our waste. There is a lot of waste, 60 million tons. We should be spending 10,000 crores a year treating that waste, roughly 2,000 rupees per ton. We're not doing that. We're hoping that somehow we'll go into compost, somehow we'll go into recycling. There's you should Google Delhi Waste Mountain. There is a 200-foot tall waste mountain in Delhi, which every once in a while falls over, kills people, destroys houses. This is the scale of issues that we are facing today. If you guys lived in Bombay a few years ago, Deonar caught fire, which is our waste dump about 10 kilometers from here. It caught fire. It covered the whole of the city with thick black smoke for many, many days. This is out of sight, out of mind. This is truly out of sight, out of mind. So we need to be fixing these issues, and we need to be fixing them quickly and not waiting for recycling to improve and waiting for organic stuff to improve. That needs to happen in parallel. We need to do both of them together.
I agree with you on that, Bhuvan. But Tony, coming back to you on this one, you had sustainability at such a large corporate house. Do you think that 2% CSR is enough? Because we're talking about a lot of capital that we're talking about over here. Do you think, how can corporates really step up their game when it comes to sustainability?
I think that's a great question. I go back to what Craig was saying about Greta's tipping point. She is scared of tipping points, but from my point of view inside a business, it's good news that we're coming towards a tipping point. We have the bankers and we have the investors, so now we're getting serious. Because now it's about, is your business sustainable? Not do you do sustainability? And so we are spending a lot of time with the assumption that we will not voluntarily create a sustainable world. Volunteers, business leaders will show the way, but we're going to have to legislate it. When we legislate a sustainable world, many businesses will become unsustainable. And so then it focuses the senior management's mind that this isn't just, it's not in my job description to save the world, so I'll do my 2%. It is in my job description to make sure I have a cash flow for the shareholders in the future and that my product is legal and I can sell it. So I need to then start to think, how do I transform my business model? How do I transform my products? A lot of businesses are going to struggle because their balance sheets can't support it, but that's where, again, the banks get interesting, because you get banks that are really leading the thinking and they're coming up with innovative ways that we can really start to finance the transition. I think Craig said before, or the gentleman before was talking about CO2 being a waste. We have to finance the transformation of the whole energy matrix. That's never been an issue that's been on the CEO's agenda before. I just plug in and I get what I need. Now it's, well, what are you taking out of the mains? How are you going to transform that? How are you actually going to make that happen? So I think we're really at a tipping point where We're going to change the lexicon from sustainability to building sustainable businesses, and that will drive a lot of change.
Coming to you, Samir, you were in Davos just recently, and we wanted to understand what you have to say about the entire United Nations Sustainability Development Program. Everybody, we are all trying to catch up to it, but how far are we?
Sure. I think let me respond to your question, but a quick sort of response to the earlier comment. So with respect to waste to energy, I think we believe that a commercial solution is feasible, and we believe that, I think with improved technology, today it can be something which is a profitable business and save on waste. That's just a comment on the earlier observation I made. So with respect to Davos, I think this year, as was said earlier, I mean, the view is that largely, you know the problem, you know the solution, but there is very little effort in implementation. So I think the thrust is that, look, we don't need to have a perfect solution, but we have to progress towards a solution as soon as possible. I think the other three broad observations, which encapsulate a number of meetings, is that we have to internalize the externalities. And this is very, very important for corporates. I mean, it's been, as was said by an earlier panelist, a lot of free lunches where corporates are not paying for the total cost of a product. So internalizing externalities and making a product cost or making a corporate responsible for that is very important. There was a line written in one of the programs which sort of talks about it. It says that the view from the top has to be more than the bottom line, which kind of also talks about the view that we have to move from a shareholder-based approach to more of a stakeholder-based approach. The third key takeaway, and I'll stop after the third one, is that global partnerships and partnerships across government and industry and also within industry. I was at a panel on plastics, Craig, where PepsiCo and Coke are coming together to say, how do we revolutionize the plastic that we use in the beverage industry? So I think the change has to be transformational, not incremental, if you're going to make an impact. That was some of the thrust of what people wanted to achieve this year.
Bhuvan, I want to take this forward with you. You guys have invested so much capital last year in a single transaction. Do you see far more private equity funds coming in and trying to deploy capital in this segment? Because it also comes at around social impact is what also people are talking about. A lot of the funds get allocated through social impact, but nobody's really looking at seriously and saying, let's do this because it can also make money and it is also sustainable in the long run. Do you see that happening?
Yeah, sure. So I think if you look at how we invested from our private equity fund. We also invested from our impact fund. So the impact fund, so that very clearly says you have to make private equities type returns, but you also have to make quantifiable, demonstrable progress against one or more of the SDGs, right? So waste management clearly has multiple SDGs, including cities, water, etc. So that's actually not a challenge. In many countries in the world, if you're trying to invest and also make returns, that's a challenge because you ultimately, if I were to do waste management in the US, it would be difficult to show what progress am I making because there's already waste management everywhere. But in India, actually, it's not a challenge because it's not everywhere. Like they pointed out, only 20% of India's waste is being processed today. So I'm happy to go out there, invest, make money on the processing, but also make progress on the SDGs. So I think there is more capital like that coming in, but frankly, waste management still is a very, very difficult business. And one of the reasons for that is that you actually have to deal with each municipality separately. Each municipality has the right to give out the tender for its waste, which also means that each contract is different. So it's not like roads where you're saying, a road in Gujarat is the same contract as a road in Tamil Nadu is the same as a road in Andhra Pradesh. Every municipality comes out with a different contract that you have to then price and try to figure out how much you can bid for it. So that actually adds a lot of complication.
Tony, coming to you, these guys are talking about recycling waste and everything. They all are working towards it. Why do you guys make waste?
That's a really great question. And that really is what I was alluding to before. Your point on externalities. We've actually come up with our own term. We've said that we impact externalities and we have to mitigate as much as we can. But external factors will become risks to our own sustainable business. And it's those risks that we can then start to use in business language to say, what are the things that are going to happen? So if it becomes waste, what is the risk that the product we make is not acceptable? What is it if maybe just to explain the difference, we talk about CO2 being an externality. We try to reduce that. Climate change, however, is an external factor. In the case of waste, there are the demand and supply side solutions. You guys are investing in trying to figure out how to solve a very complicated problem. And I think over time, the younger generation is going to start to say, you can't make these things. And we'll either have advocacy and then law, or we'll have demonstrations that say boycotts, and we'll have to then start to change our business model. And that's the tipping point that I think is happening in the mindsets of senior management, where they're realizing that the future of their business is actually at stake. And it isn't just save the world, no, I'm not really interested. It's my business is at stake, and in order to save it, I have to save the world. And now I have a justification. I can go to the board, I can actually finance, I can actually do things. And that link has been missing. And that is really the change that I see happening at this point in time.
I just wanted to point out, like, look, I know we are talking about India and how waste management is poor here. The reality is when you look at recycling, it's bad all over the world. Nobody anywhere in the world is doing a good job in recycling. Some of this comes to the light when China bans plastic imports. Then suddenly the world realizes that people in the US and Europe who thought that they were recycling plastic were actually just sending it on to China, sending it on to Malaysia, and now sending it on to India. So the reality is, this is a global problem. I think recycling in itself, we need to reduce waste generation, but we also need to figure out how to recycle. And this is not an easy problem to solve. People around the world have not quite solved it yet. So I think we shouldn't shy away from saying that this is a difficult problem. We need resources. We need more R&D into this. And we need folks, like ourselves, like BNP, et cetera, to actually commit capital and try to solve this problem.
Can I make one comment?
Sure.
So there are some companies which are based internationally, which we have been talking to, which have sort of tried to address this in a meaningful manner. There's a company out of California which does syngas technology, and that has a solution to make sort of MSW more profitable. Again, these are early stage companies which have received funding, but that has to be proven. There is a company, again, in North America we are talking to, which can convert CO2 into fuel. But these solutions can work at scale, and I think they need to grow as well. There is a company which does motors out of California, where they're saying that the consumption of power will be 50% lower. So these are three companies we are in extensive discussions with. But energy and energy savings is a global business. If we can find solutions for it, the applications can be global. So I do believe that there is hope, and that many of these solutions, once implemented at scale, can address some of these issues. I think the key need is to get started. I think that's kind of where we have to stop talking about and debating about what is the best solution and look at the best available solution and get going.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that, look, the reality is a lot of these startups, historically, a lot of research has not gotten momentum because waste has been underpriced. People have been, if I throw this away, it doesn't cost me anything to throw this away. That was not priced into the cost of producing this garment. So if you have an underpricing of waste, like we talked about water, why would anybody put in money? Because there's no money to be made at the end of it. I think that is changing, and because that is changing, there will be support for more startups who will invent ways to reduce waste, because now waste becomes expensive for you.
Okay, I'm going to take two questions. I'm really sorry, we're running out of time. Yes.
The solid waste management rules 2016 talk about a whole lot of duties for different stakeholders, including consumers and so on. One of the stakeholders is the producers, who are responsible for ultimately generating a lot of waste through packaging material and so on. And it talks about how they should be creating systems to take back post-consumer waste, so that, and build that into the cost of the product itself, or in whichever way possible. But they seem to be reluctant to actually set up those kind of systems today. The laws are not great. They're not watertight. So what will take brands to actually, incorporate this into their costs so that they not just spend on logistics, but also reverse logistics, because the consumer does not care. So the brand needs to set up those systems. So what will it take a brand to set that up?
I think that's a great question, and it really is the 2016 rules really were the start of this awakening, because then people realized that, well, I cannot pay to collect every plastic bag I make, so then I have to figure out how not to use plastic bags. And so you're right, businesses are not necessarily setting up to collect everything because it's too expensive. The government's been very clever. They didn't say we're banning plastic bags. They said you need to collect it. We then said, wow, that's expensive. How can I go to jute bags, lined jute bags, paper bags, different things? And there's a massive amount of research. You'll see in our cement business, particularly the home putties and what have you, moving to paper bags. All that is starting to happen. It's taking time because we've got to retool the plants. We've got to come up with the way of doing it. But I can assure you there's a huge amount of work going on to prevent, and not just to say we'll do it and then we'll work with these guys to collect it.
Yeah, I think the good news there is that people do want to do it. Coke does want to do it. Reckitt Benckiser does want to do it. HUL does want to do it. I think the bad news is if you want to buy, as an example, if you want to buy recycled plastic in India today and make your shampoo bottle 15% recycled plastic or 20% recycled plastic, that grade of plastic doesn't exist in India today. People are working on it. The plastic recycling startup that I've been mentoring for 5 years, these guys came back from California, wanted to do something for India, and their plant just got inaugurated in January. So this is the first plant in India where you can throw in a shampoo bottle which has been used, and you'll come out with plastic which is good enough to be used for another shampoo bottle. So there are things which are happening. They're small scale and they're moving a bit slowly. But the good news is, thankfully, that the producers, the good producers, actually do want to show that they are being responsible.
I just wanted to add one line to it. I mean, it's also about consumer behavior. I mean, if there is somebody who will buy a bottle of plastic, there will be somebody who will sell it.
The ownership issue, the stakeholders' ownership issue, the stakeholders in this waste management are the masses, the public, the municipalities, the industry or the corporate world. Wherever I have gone with this issue that what is to be done with the waste management, I've been working with for last almost 1.5 to 2 years with plastic waste management, thermocol waste management, e-waste and so on. We are working at a very, very minuscule level. But wherever we go, people try to avoid whatever is to be done by them. There's no ownership seen by me into that. Is there some kind of innovative, ideas that can be thrown by the esteemed panel? How do you bring that? If it is industry, it is trading community, they just find a way how they can bypass the laws and make sure that their business is kept intact. If it is consumers, when we go door to door and ask for people, you give it, they say, kya farak padta hai? It doesn't matter to me, why should I bother about it? So in short, are there any ways the esteemed panel can think where ownership to the stakeholders can be bought, where waste can be controlled in much more better manner? Thank you.
One of the things I hypothesize about a sustainable world is it's a highly controlled world. It has to be. 9 billion of us doing what we like, we've already proved is not sustainable. I was really interested to read about traffic lights which listen to horns and then stay longer. The solution in terms of the implementation of the law, for me, is a lot IT-based. So the use of cameras on rivers so that you can see who throws the stuff in. Sensors are becoming cheaper, they'll be deployed. You as an NGO can start deploying, taking readings, relaying that. The use of the internet. So I think that's how the law gets enforced. And then I think over time, because of the Gretas of this world and the younger generation, those laws will have to be tightened. So you end up then with businesses to be sustainable have to be incredibly highly controlled, very well managed, with very carefully thought through product designs. And that's kind of where we're looking at for 2030 and then on to 2050.
I think if you've watched a movie in Maharashtra, you've seen the ad in the beginning that talks about don't smoke, and it's the kid in the ad which asks the dad, like, why are you smoking, right? And then the dad puts out this cigarette. So I think like that, honestly, the kids, if you educate the kids and you make this stuff cool, and I think they really do think it's cool. So, and they're waking up to it. If they start putting pressure on their parents that, hey, if they start asking questions, hey, by the way, what do we do with our garbage? Are we segregating it? Why or not? Are we composting it in our community, which we are supposed to? Why aren't we doing that? I really think that when they put pressure on their parents, that's one of the ways that it can happen. There was a CEO of a recycling company that I was talking to once, and he said that, look, I do it because my kids think I'm cool. I mean, and I really thought that was kind of telling, because we will literally do anything to make our kids think we're cool. So maybe some part is education, maybe some part is media. I think some part is some documentaries from you. I think that will really help, because they'll put pressure on us and keep us honest.
I want to thank all the panelists here, and I want to leave you all with a note. Do you know it takes 2,437 liters to make one pair of jeans that you wear? Think about it when you buy it. Think about it when you throw it easily. Thank you.